Thank you so much. Thanks to the organizer for the invitation and the opportunity to present this work here. Nicola, Cetera, Julio, Elias, and I are very grateful for this opportunity. This is what we consider as the first step in a broader research agenda that is going to look at whether and how individuals make trade-offs between different policy options that have different efficiency and ethical implications. So in this paper in particular, we look at attitudes about repugnant transactions that are ethically controversial, and whether they are affected by information about their efficiency consequences. So there are many transactions that are prohibited in modern societies. A lot of these prohibited transactions or heavily regulated transactions are prohibited or regulated due to health and safety considerations or negative externalities. But some of them are prohibited due to ethical concerns. You think about organ sales or prostitution, or I have other examples I'm going to mention later. And we label these, economists, we label these as repugnant transactions. So what we mean by repugnant transactions, following Al Roth, as definition, essentially is a transaction that some people would be willing to engage in, whereas others would like to prevent them from doing so. So the society or a third party doesn't think that certain transactions should take place in the marketplace, and they wish to prohibit them. In ethics, the terminology is a little bit different. Repugnance is defined as a residual category for ethical opposition. There are many rational ethical reasons for prohibiting organ sales, for example. They have to do with exploitation of the poor, coercion, commodification of the human body. The residual category is this emotional expression of deep wisdom beyond the power of reason to fully articulate this yuck factor, visceral repugnance sense when we observe certain transactions taking place. So I think it's pretty remarkable that what is considered repugnant changes over time, and not just across societies, but also within the same society over time. There are many examples. For example, lending money for interest was considered a repugnant activity in the past. It's still considered among Islamic Muslim societies as a repugnant transaction. And so was life insurance. Life insurance was considered highly repugnant because you couldn't attach a monetary value to life. To get life insurance was considered as a gamble against God, essentially. And so it was considered highly repugnant and not allowed. Obviously, that life insurance is today widespread and has created arguably a large efficiency gains, large welfare gains for society. So there are other examples of transactions or activities that used to be repugnant and are now allowed, or vice versa, that used to be okay and allowed, like indentured servitude or slavery, and that today are not allowed. So why study attitudes about these controversial, ethically controversial policies? Well, because some of the examples that I gave, some of these prohibitions have consequences for welfare and for efficiency. It is important to understand the nature of certain attitudes to be able to predict how they will change, for example, with technological improvements, advances, like when it became technologically possible to take a heart from a body and transplant the heart into another body. That was considered a repugnant transaction, even though no monetary exchanges were involved. So technological advance all of a sudden makes it possible to achieve higher welfare and efficiency is often received in a negative way by society. So it's important to understand how these attitudes arise and change over time, and also to inform policymakers about, at a given point in time, what policy options are actually available to them and what policy options are actually off the table and not available because people consider them highly repugnant. I gave a few months ago a short presentation in front of the congressional staff members who were interested in the bone marrow issue. This could be a separate whole other topic, but there is today interest by policymakers on payments for body parts. So we think this is an interesting thing to look at. We'll be looking specifically at the case of payments for kidney donors. there's a shortage of kidneys in the United States and everywhere around the world. The figures are really, really starking. Like about 100,000 patients are on the waiting list today for a kidney in the US. There are only 17,000 transplants performed. About 6,000 patients die every year, because while on the waiting list. The average waiting time for a kidney has increased over time. It's currently about 5 years. And at current trends, the average waiting time will soon exceed the average life expectancy of patients in dialysis. So it's really, so the gap between demand for organs and the supply of organs is really large and increasing. Turns out that Julio and Gary Becker have this nice, very, very nice paper where they estimate the likely effects of payments for kidneys. And they estimate that, but with payments between 15,000 and 30,000, depending on what you assume about elasticity of demand and supply, you could increase supply sufficiently to eliminate the shortage. At the same time, there's also in addition to the lives that would be saved, there's a financial saving for Medicare, for the healthcare sector, because transplants are better, not just for the health of the recipient, but they also save a lot of money, because dialysis, which is the alternative, is very, very expensive. In spite of these potential efficiency gains, payments for organs are illegal in the US and in virtually everywhere. There's only one exception, which is the Islamic Republic of Iran, where where payments are allowed. And if you look at the laws and declarations by ethics councils, the language is very, very strong. The reasons why payments are not allowed indicate that payments for organs are highly repugnant in the sense that, you look at the language. Fundamental truths of our society of life and liberty should not have a monetary price. It's like these statements suggest that we as a society do not allow payments for organs because we cannot put a monetary value to a body part. This would be against inalienable values of life and liberty. It is ethically unacceptable. So there's a strong sense in which this transaction is considered repugnant today in most societies. So this is what the type of transaction activities that we have in mind. Activities where there is a trade-off between efficiency and morality. Different solutions to in this case, the organ shortage problems can be placed in different parts of this Pareto frontier. Purely altruistic donations would score very highly on the morality axis and very low on the efficiency axis, as we know. Kidney exchanges somewhere in the middle. Paying for organs would score very, very low on the morality axis and potentially very highly on the efficiency axis in terms of increased supply and lives saved and quality of life improvements and savings for the healthcare sector. Now, depending on people with different preferences will choose different efficiency morality solutions. If I'm someone with standard preferences, I might be willing to trade off efficiency for morality, give up a little bit of my morality for gains in efficiency. The language used in the laws and the ethics declaration suggests that a lot of people are unwilling to make trade-offs. It's a very, very steep indifference curves indicating a very, very indicating a small willingness to trade off morality for efficiency. The sacred values or protected values have been studied in psychology and in ethics, and it's possible that people's preferences are more like that as opposed to what we typically assume as standard preferences. So that's what we want to test. So suppose that a new evidence becomes available that the least moral options all of a sudden are found out to be more efficient than previously thought. So, moral options, below a certain level of morality become more efficient. So, from someone who's not willing to trade off efficiency for morality, that will have no effect on my beliefs, on my attitudes, actually, on my attitudes about those transactions. Whereas if I'm someone like this guy with sort of standard preferences, I realize now that the less moral solution is more efficient than I thought. I might change my mind. I will, if I'm that specific guy, I will change my mind. My previous moral rule is inefficient. I'll revise my moral rule, lessening it a little bit and opt for a less moral but more efficient solution. This is what we are trying to test to check in this paper. Does information about the organ shortage problem and the possible role of payments, does it affect attitudes toward payments to organ donors? The way we do it is through a randomized experiment administered to about 3,500 US residents on Amazon Mechanical Turk. The treatment will be a short text which will report information about the organ shortage problem in the United States and possible solutions, including allowing payments for organs. So this is the text that we show to the treatment group. There's the first paragraph describes the problem, the shortage. The second talks about altruism and kidney exchange as options to increase donations, implied consent as another also ethically controversial policy option for increasing the supply of organs, and payments to donors. And also for each statement that we had in this text, we provided a reference to a scientific paper, an academic paper, so that the subjects would actually see that these aren't just our opinions as researchers, that these are the positions and facts have been documented in the academic literature. So to measure attitudes toward payments, we're a little bit concerned about the social desirability of someone who's been asked, do you agree with the payments for organs? And that question is socially charged, obviously, and so someone might not feel comfortable in admitting that they are in favor of payments for organs. So we resort to this very nice technique. So what happens is that each experimental condition will include two groups as follows. So the first group will be shown 4 statements unrelated to the topic that we are studying, and then the subjects will be asked, okay, how many of these statements apply to you? And then we'll take the average. Suppose the average is 2. The second group will receive an additional 5th statement, which is our focal statement of interest. I would support the introduction of regulated monetary payments for live organ donors and for the families of deceased organ donors. This is the statement we care about. Suppose the average, and we look at again, we ask, how many of these statements apply to you? Suppose the average is 2.3. The difference between 2.3 and 2 is 0.3. 30% of the subjects, we can infer from this exercise that 30% of the subjects agree with our statement of interest, would be in favor of payments for organs. The experimental design, so we have, like I said, the treatment group will be shown the text on organs, and then that will be divided into 2 subgroups. The first group will, so at the beginning we tell people, look, you're going to be shown a text, and we're going to ask you a question, so read the text carefully. Half of that group will receive a question related to organ payments and their likely effect. The other half will receive a question related to another part of the text, and then each of these 2 subgroups will be divided into 2 parts. One will receive 4 statements, and the second group will receive the 5 statements, so we can measure attitudes for those populations. Then we have a control group. They receive no text. We measure their attitudes toward organ payments. And we have a placebo group. We give them a text about the flu. We ask them a question about flu symptoms, and then we measure their attitudes about organ payments. Finally, we ask them, to those who received a text, how reliable they thought that the information included in the text was. One of the mechanisms that could be going on is that prior attitudes, say I'm opposed to organ payments, then I might discount the reliability of information telling me that organ payments can actually be good. And so we wanted to measure that in the study. Finally, we had a sociodemographic survey to capture demographic, sociodemographic characteristics. Okay, this is the main slide of this presentation. We found so the group with the control group, 50% of the control group, or roughly 50% of the control group, would favor payment. So there's a split. There's a 50-50 split between people in favor and people against payments for organs. The effect of the organ text is large. It's 20 percentage points increase in the share who favors the payments for organs, and which amounts to about 40% of those who are initially against payment. So the text seems to have a strong positive effect on attitudes toward organ payments. We are particularly happy about this result, which in the baseline we get about a 50% approval rate, which is not far from what Roth and Steve Leider find in their survey, which was administered to a representative sample of US cities. So it's very, very similar. So we get the same results from regressions, including controls. We found no difference between the flu text and the control, or between the subjects who were asked about the price effects and those who were asked another comprehension question. And also, it's remarkable that the effect is not driven, it's not just large, but it's not driven by any specific subgroup. We didn't find much heterogeneity. And I'll explain why we think this is important in a second. So what we did a few additional analyses. One possibility is that the effect that we find is due to the specific information that we provided, or just to, we made people realize that, what, market mechanisms, a price mechanism is good, can lead to good outcomes. So maybe they are responding to that rather than to the specific information. So we did the same exercise with a similarly controversial transaction, prostitution, and we looked both at direct effects, and in ongoing research we'll be looking at cross effects. So if I show someone a text about legalizing prostitution and its likely effects, what happens to attitudes for organ payments? There was also this possibility that subjects exposed to any kind of information would respond to any kind of information. So we did the same exercise with an extremely repugnant transaction, slavery, and I'll show you what happened with that. And then we did, for the reliability, 90% of the subjects found the text reliable for organs, the flu text, and the prostitution text. A smaller share found that the text reliable for the slavery text reliable. So these are the results for legalizing indoors prostitution. I'm showing a short summary of the text message. So prostitution is illegal in the US with a few exceptions in Nevada. Street-level prostitution is associated with STDs, violence, and crime. Recent empirical evidence suggests that legalizing indoors prostitution could actually have positive effects, could reduce STDs and could reduce violence. And then our fifth statement of interest here was, I would support the legalization of indoor prostitution within a regulated framework. This is the result. We don't find an effect. So the approval rate is higher to begin with, but there's no effect of the text, except there's huge heterogeneity. Women and men. Men, there's a big effect on men. There's a negative effect of the text on women. There's also a big heterogeneity between religious and non-religious individuals. So non-religious individuals are affected by the text in the sense that they become more in favor of legalizing prostitution. Religious individuals, not so much. Actually, no, there's a decline also for them. For slavery, the approval, it's a similar argument that we did our best to create, sort of a rational argument in favor. And fortunately, not a lot of people agree with this statement. It's reassuring. That was our goal. Our goal was to have to use a transaction, an activity that's strongly repugnant. Okay, it was precisely our goal. So more than 20 million people in poor countries actually live under de facto slavery, even though slavery is illegal everywhere around the world. But de facto, we have 20 million people who live like slaves. Now, it's possible that introducing a legal framework might have beneficial effects on their living conditions. There's some evidence from the US, from the post-slavery era, indicating that health and life expectancy of freedmen worsened compared to before, to the period before. So the fifth statement was, I would support the introduction of a legal framework that allows regulated slavery contracts. So as you can see, there was no effect of the treatment, and the percentage was very, very small. Which is interesting that for both prostitution and slavery, we get no effect, even for two activities, one of which has a high approval rate and one of which has a very low approval rate. There's a lot of heterogeneity here, or some heterogeneity, I should say. Again, men and women. Men seem to to respond more to this information, whereas women don't. Actually, their approval rate goes down. And also, according to political orientation, liberals don't like, that are not affected and don't like the idea, whereas conservatives and moderates, we do see an effect for them. So finally, this is my last slide. So we have found that attitudes toward payments to organ donors seem to be malleable and sensitive to information. The effect was sizable and not driven by any specific subgroup. The effect seems to be driven by information specific to the issue. We found no effects, negligible effects on attitudes toward prostitution and slavery, although we found large differences across subgroups. there are some insights for policymakers. New information and scientific evidence can play a role in shaping people's attitudes about policy solutions that are morally controversial. However, a case-by-case approach seems to be necessary to determine which policy options are actually available to policymakers. In future research, we plan to better understand the trade-offs between morality and economic efficiency, to look at spillover effects and cross effects, estimate actual preferences, distinguishing between different reasons for opposing payments, including exploitation and coercion, for which you can actually devise policy options that could mitigate those versus pure repugnance, which cannot be mitigated by changes in policy design. I'll just stop here and thank you again for your attention. No, this is a great question. So this is part of what we plan to do next, but our results so far suggest that a large fraction of individuals are not of the latter kind. People who actually would be willing to make trade-offs. The first part of your question, I found a quote. So it was about certain people have sort of very different moral rules. And so this is what we get when we as economists get into ethical issues. There's this quote from a Yale sociologist who was quoted in a New York Times article. It says, "The problem is not that economists are unreasonable people. It's that they are evil people." They work in a different moral universe. So I thought about this statement yesterday, giving the keynote address in the morning, and this keynote address about the other minds. I think this is one example. This the opposition to certain transactions that some people would like to do, and others, the one that do is one example of other minds.
This division is clearly because historically, economics is a branch of utilitarian ethics.
Yes.
And so, utilitarian ethics is like a type of consequentialist ethics. They care about outcomes.
Yes.
And there's like other branches of ethics that do not care about outcomes.
Absolutely.
And you might have people who refuse, who say organ donations are a bad thing, not for deontological reasons, that you think that there are certain rules and certain things which should always be prohibited. So people might be against organ donation because they might think it can be abused, and they might actually be in favor of it if it can be regulated such that it can be made sure that vulnerable people will not be, forced to donate.
These are really interesting points. It's part of what we want to do, and the next speaker is very Thank you.